Absolutely. And so welcome, of course, again to everyone home. Um, I'll start by just sharing some foundational information about who we are. Um, Everyone Home is a collective impact initiative that was founded in 2007. And it was founded in a manner that would allow for all 14 cities and the board, as well as community members, to work together and develop a plan and policy priorities for our continuum of care, as well as our overall goal, of course, to end and prevent homelessness in our county. And so this visual you see below identifies all of the key stakeholders. So we have county agencies represented here, we have city representatives, nonprofit providers, advocates, community members, most importantly, individuals with lived expertise, all working hand in hand to focus in on how we could end homelessness in our community. And then the concept collective impact initiative is a term that's actually that was coined many years ago, but it's a concept in which organizations are established that have multiple stakeholders to solve a specific problem. And there's organizations actually that provide support and resources and guidance on how to have and run an effective impact initiative. And some of the concepts around having a collective impact initiative include valuing the importance of having a collective community voice. And so bringing in multiple voices to focus in on how we advance this cause. The reason why we also created this organization as a collective impact initiative outside of the county was to be able to also have an influence on political will for additional funding, as well as advocating for various policy reforms, and then really to work together to create a community plan to end homelessness. And before I move on to the next slide, I want to just have an opportunity to ask Mo, is there anything else in terms of the history of the organization that you want to add to this component?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that Alameda County is has its own unique characteristics, and one of them is that we're a big county, we're an urban county that also has some rural areas. We have 14 cities, and homelessness is not spread equally over the county, yet it affects every one of us. And so, having this process where we can all get together and discuss the issues and the solutions, I think is a very effective way to deal with homelessness in our county. And those of us who have been on the board for a little while have just gone through a long process to really look at that and bring more voices in so that we can really try to solve this problem, which is solvable if we're diligent about it.
Absolutely. And so in addition to being the HUD designated continuum of care that you'll hear more information about soon, and coordinating and bringing together all of the voices across our county, our organization is staffed by a backbone staff of a lean, mean, mighty machine that works towards supporting this board, all of our committees and work groups, ensuring our compliance with HUD requirements, as well as helping to lead various components of the work that we do as a COC, from our point in time count to NOFO. There are a lot of acronyms here. We actually have an acronym cheat sheet that we will be providing to everyone as well. But just wanted to let you know that some of the staff members that introduced themselves, we have some new staff members joining us soon, will be providing the support for the board as well as the work that we do, and also help with our external communication in regards to the efforts that Everyone Home is doing to end homelessness. I will share that our organization is an organization in which any member of the public can be affiliated with and connected to as it pertains to our Continuum of Care and Collective Impact Initiative. And all individuals have to do is join our public meetings that happen approximately twice a year. And showing up is the only step. There's no fee or no additional requirements. They're able to weigh in and vote on various decisions related to our governance, etc. And so as a member of this board, I would encourage you to invite people to join our community meetings. And then all of our meetings are open to the public, are posted on our website, etc. But it's important to be clear that we are EveryOne Home. And so really and truly a collective impact initiative working together. You are here because we now have a new governance structure, and this is something that has been a community-based effort that has been going on for over a year. So today is extremely exciting to bring you all on board and also to refresh some of our current board members. But our structure is one in which you see at the heart, there is the leadership board that really sets the policy decisions and the direction for the work that we do. And you'll also note that this structure also has infused in it, and you'll hear more about why, a race equity work group and multiple committees from outreach, access, and coordination, housing capacity committee, which is a newly conceptualized committee that will focus on how can we expand our affordable housing footprint, as well as a new committee focused on how do we address homelessness prevention. So how do we address this inflow issue, as well as a committee that will focus on ensuring our compliance with HUD rules and regulations, and a systems impact committee that will look at our data, our performance, and report out in regards to recommendations on how to be a more effective and efficient continuum of care. And so there is all of these committees that report up to this board, and there is representation from each of the committees on the board. This slide is, and all of this material will be provided to you, and this is being recorded so that folks who aren't here can watch it, but also a resource to you in the future. But our board composition includes a pretty large collaboration of various stakeholders. You'll notice that a third of our board are individuals with lived experience, which we will refer to as community members, of course, that have joined our board. We have a designated seat for the city of Oakland and Berkeley, who will also represent Albany and Emeryville and Piedmont. And then there are seats for our regions. And this was in response to the regions and some of our smaller and mid-sized cities wanting representation at the table. Those seats will hopefully be filled within the next month or two. And then we also have representation from our county departments, the Healthcare Services Agency, SSA, Housing Community Development, as well as probation. There is a designated spot for the Public Housing Authority representative, and you'll notice that there are multiple seats for our nonprofit providers and affordable housing developer. Also advocacy and citizen. And so as you see, as I continue to talk, that there is definitely a wide range of value add, perspective, and experience at this table. The work of this board is to set the strategic direction and the collective goals for our entire homeless system, to work through and delegate various aspects of the work to the committees and the work groups, and allow that report out to occur on an ongoing basis. And also now, and this is a shift with this new governance, the leadership board will also serve as the designated HUD Continuum of Care board to ensure compliance with HUD rules and regulations. And now I'll pass it over to Mo to discuss some of our core values.
So, okay, is Susan Shelton here? No, so I will, Susan and I were going to share this portion, but so since she isn't here, I'm going to go through these. There are quite a few of them. We can't really get into a deep discussion about them, but these subjects do come up during our meetings, and we need to go back to them and think about how they our work. So the first one is our work together is focused on collective impact, and it leverages the strengths of each of us. We all come from different places, and we need to kind of speak from our own personal knowledge and experience. It's intentionally designed to center racial equity and active elimination of racial disparities. That's something that when we looked at the problem of homelessness, it has a huge basis in racial discrimination of the past and present systems. So people with lived experience of homelessness are involved in the decision making, and I think that has been very intentional, and we're trying to keep that throughout our whole system. We embody transparency. Our meetings are open. You can hear what happens in them, and we try to report out as to what to the general public. The homeless services workforce, including senior leadership and boards of directors, should reflect the racial and ethnic diversity of the people we serve. We're trying to do that on the nominating committee with who we bring in onto our boards and committees. And so that's an important aspect in trying to get broadening our participation. We also ensure that we have accurate, up-to-date, and comprehensive, meaningful data to inform decision-making. Homelessness is a complicated problem, and it's not one thing, it's a lot of things, and it's a lot of social issues involved. So we try to provide the information that we can to make decisions in a rational way based on data. The staff and organizations in our homeless system are equipped with ongoing anti-racist training and skills and knowledge that they need to implement equitable solutions. So that is something that we are implementing with this board, and we will be continuing that through the years as we move through our process. So elected officials and others will be in power will be offered education on homelessness, anti-racism, and the importance of centering the voice of lived experience. Some of that did occur quite a bit when we went through our centering racism in our the study that is available on our network, on our website. So anyway, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and our approach needs to deal with these historical biases that have created homelessness in our society. So we measure targets to achieve racial equity outcomes and power sharing with people with lived experience. We regularly monitor our experience towards reaching them. So you will see reports or dashboards on the website, and I think there's going to be a whole individual website that has that information on it as well. We seek opportunities to support agencies run by BIPOC individuals and communities, and we, reached out to a number of the BIPOC individuals and communities, and we're hoping to do more as we broaden the decision making in our county. We work relentlessly to break down silos between agencies, programs, and sectors that impact homelessness, and that's why we have a real diversity of agencies, city and county, as part of our board and committees. They're very important to make sure that the work is done in a collaborative way. We can only end homelessness by collaborating within and across sectors to prevent homelessness and eliminate racial disparities in who becomes homeless. So that's, I think, certainly, the same thing that we've looked at before. All people experiencing homelessness in our county, particularly BIPOC, are aware and have access to a range of housing services needed to exit homelessness. And this is something that, we have outreach, but it hasn't been as thorough and deep as it should be. And so we believe that we need to reach more deeply into BIPOC communities. And finally, racial equity is not a short-term initiative, but an overarching long-term commitment that shapes everything we do as a system. And we measure the effects of racial equity on our programs, and you'll hear reports of that throughout our meetings.
Wonderful. All of these core values are included in our governance charter that you received a copy of. And quite frankly, as we move through this presentation and as you continue your role as a board member, you will see how this is showing up in the work that we do.
And I apologize that for being delivered by one old white man, but my partner, Susan Shelton, I guess, was in transit, and she and I were going to share this.
Yes, and in fact, Susan was also going to co-facilitate this portion of the presentation, but I will walk us through, and she might join us while we're presenting. If so, she'll, I'm certain, hop right in. But just to give some framework in regards to, you're hearing a constant theme of our community acknowledging the need to center race equity and homeless system design. And you might be wondering, where did that come from? Or why are we really so adamantly focused on this issue in this way? And it started, quite frankly, back in 2019, when we had the pick count that occurred before this pick count that revealed a significant increase, almost 43% increase in homelessness in our county. And as we as a community saw this extreme increase in homelessness happening, questions started to occur in terms of, well, who is it that's experiencing homelessness? Of course, we saw it with our eyes, but we needed the data to support what we were seeing. And what we did see was that there was a disproportionate amount of African Americans and American Indians experiencing homelessness. And so the blue was the general population, which was 11%, and those experiencing homelessness represented 43%. And you saw these disparities across any group of people that were of color, from our American Indian to multiracial. And as a result, realized that we needed to do more work to understand what was missing in our system that was causing this outcome. As a result, there was a large collective effort that was led over many months that was supported by our HUD TA support, as well as our leadership across the county, to focus in on the qualitative and quantitative research that we needed to do to figure out how we center race equity. So there was focus groups. You see some of these logos here, multiple organizations working together, really trying to determine what we needed to change in our system moving forward. And ultimately, a report was created, an executive summary report, as well as a full report, both of which are located on our website, both of which we are extremely proud about, because it really sets the stage in a way that many other COCs are looking to us to see how we have approached this. And so what it does is it really calls out that we have an issue here where we have a disproportionate amount of Black, Indigenous, and multiracial people experiencing homelessness. It boldly says that it's due to historic and structural racism. So some of my emerging leaders in the room recall that we had a full session where we looked at some of the laws, the zoning, redlining, all of the different intentional discriminatory acts that occurred in our county to cause this increase in ultimately the systemic racism that resulted in these disparities. And it identified some new solutions, some recommendations on what we could do to try to change our system, and presented them in a manner in which it was supported by our county, by our mayors across the county, and reflected in various aspects of the work we're doing. One of the areas that you'll see the outcome and outgrowth of that work is the Home Together plan that was released a month ago, I believe. And the Home Together plan is the 5-year plan for the county to end homelessness. And it used the centering race equity work as the framework. It added new shallow subsidies as a recommendation, acknowledging that sometimes what needs to occur for us to prevent homelessness or provide those who are experiencing housing instability is long-term subsidies versus the need for always having full wraparound services, right? And also the need for new dedicated affordable housing. And so this, of course, is something that is identified in the Home Together plan and points directly back to the work that we did with the centering race equity. You are here as the outgrowth of us also making a bold decision to revise our governance. And so many of our new board members are here because they represent the voices and the people that we need at the table. And will be able to influence the outcomes, as well as there have been multiple policy decisions, and just to highlight a few, where you can see that we are keeping true to this focus and this value, from how we're tracking our data through a race equity lens and looking at the different demographics and how they're impacted by various components in our programs. You will hear at the leadership board meeting about our coordinated entry work and where we have opportunity to even improve that further, and various other targeted resources, our emergency housing vouchers, etc. And so with that, I will pause and hand it over to Dusty Olson, who we are fortunate to have with us with APT to assist with giving us the foundational framework around the work we do, but also talking with us and sharing with us the importance of us working together and having good communication and collaboration. And so, Dusty.
Thanks, Chelsea. I just want to do a chime check. I have us ending at 1:15. So I don't know that there's time remaining to do both of the full presentations. Is there something you'd like me to start with, knowing that we might not get through the other one, or how would you like to proceed?
Well, Mo, do you have a recommendation on that? I would suggest if we can at least go through some of the slides related to authentic engagement, Dusty. And one of the things that I wanted to share with the group is that this training is going to be ongoing. We felt it important to have a preliminary orientation today, but that there will be ongoing leadership training as we move forward. And so I would suggest, Dusty, that we potentially start with the authentic engagement and see if we can move quickly through the CLC.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, so just to introduce myself again quickly, I am Dusty Olson. I am with APT Associates, which is one of the firms that is contracted with HUD to provide technical assistance. We have had a staff member from APT Associates assigned to Oakland and Alameda County for your technical assistance. For a number of years, Chelsea mentioned the significant increase in homelessness that your community experienced a few years ago. And since that time, HUD has had an assigned person specifically to work with your community to provide support for you. And so I am one of several providers that is currently working in different spaces throughout your continuum to help support you as you transition both your governance and really work to adopt best practices. So I'm going to start today by talking about authentic engagement and partnership with persons with lived experience. This is a topic that I teach on a lot. In fact, I teach a workshop for HUD that is 3 months long with multiple communities that participate with both in-person or large group and small group work. So this is going to be a very high level overview of what is most effectively done as a really intensive community space with lots of individualized work. So hopefully there'll be opportunities for us to dive in deeper on this subject with you. So we did introductions already, so we don't need that. But I'd like it if you could take a minute to drop into the chat. What is it that keeps you engaged in your work? Whether that's your work in this field, whether that's your work as a board member, whether that's your regular 9-to-5 job, or just the things that you're passionate about. I just want you to drop into the chat. What are the things that keep you engaged? And the reason that I ask you to do that is because often we think about our own personal engagement as something that's significantly different than when we're thinking about engaging with persons with lived expertise. So, I know for myself, what keeps me engaged is an opportunity to make a difference. I am fairly compensated for my work, and I am in a position to make to have my work be impactful and be able to see the value of the work that I do, right? So that's my personal engagement piece. And when we ask persons with lived expertise of homelessness to engage in our systems, right, we often don't think about how we ensure that they stay engaged. And there's no magic science behind it. It's the same things that keep you engaged in the work that you do. And it's generally not one thing, it's generally a combination of things. So we're going to talk a little bit today, and this is, like I said, going to be very high level. We're going to talk about authentic engagement and sharing power and creating partnerships with persons with lived experience. Okay. Why is authentic engagement and partnerships with persons with lived experience, particularly with Black, Indigenous, and persons of color with lived experience of homelessness is important? As Chelsea mentioned, right, in the data, particularly in your community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are the most impacted by homelessness. That is not unique to you. That is really in every community across the country. Persons of color disproportionately experience homelessness. But the current homelessness response system has historically been predominantly established and led by white leadership. And generally, white leaders are not very close to the issues and the systems and the historical racism within those institutions that leads to the increase in homelessness within communities of color. And so it's important that we think about not only when you're thinking about persons with lived experience, but also thinking about persons with lived experience that represent the communities that are most likely to experience homelessness. Because those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but further from the resources and power, right? Like, I love that quote because that is true in our systems. That's true in just about every system, that those most likely to be impacted also usually have the least ability to be impactful. And so really working to make sure that your work to address homelessness is successful requires the full participation and leadership of those that are most impacted by the policy and decisions that you're making as a group. You'll hear me talk as I move through this about persons experiencing homelessness, right? That is really this idea that person-centered language is important. So we don't talk about homeless people, right? Because homelessness doesn't define somebody. They are an individual who is experiencing homelessness. And so that language is important to make sure that we're being person-centered and we're being trauma-informed. But you will also hear the idea of lived experience versus lived expertise. So anybody who experiences homelessness is a person with lived experience of homelessness, right? They have had that experience. It is part of who they are. It is not define who they are, but it is part of who they are as a result of that experience. When you bring somebody into a space, right? Whether that's your board or your committees or your planning activities, right? And they are coming as a person with lived experience of homelessness. You are bringing them into that space because they offer a specific expertise that nobody else can bring to that space, right? And so you will hear them in a lot of communities used interchangeably, but we really try to push in this work that everyone has a lived experience of homelessness. But when you bring somebody into a space, it is because you are asking for their lived expertise of homelessness, right? You are treating them like an expert, like they have valuable information that nobody else has that can come to the table and bring that. And the term expertise is important because it indicates that you value what those individuals bring to the table. Generally, you're expected to compensate people for their expertise, which is critically important to authentic engagement, right? And it demonstrates that they have something that other people do not have, more than just having an experience. So it's just an additional way to demonstrate value. Historically, when as systems, when we have invited persons with lived expertise of homelessness into our spaces, it has been very much about what they can do for me. So I am required by HUD to have a person with lived experience on my board. Check, that means that I'm eligible to get HUD funding. Or I need to get information about the effectiveness of our programs. So I'm going to have a focus group and I'm going to feed people pizza and I'm going to tell them what it is. I'm going to get from them the information that I need so that I can improve my program, which is a valuable thing to do. Or I'm going to be able to write a better grant or all of those things. But it's been historically about what I can get from other people. That is a very transactional relationship, right? You give something to me and I take it and go do my thing with it. What the goal of authentic engagement with persons with lived expertise of homelessness is really about becoming a transformational relationship, which is really about focusing on people getting something from each other, right? So transformational relationships are not one-off. They're not like I'm going to have a focus group and I'm never going to talk to you again, right? They require trust and understanding and shared commitments. And so as you bring more persons with lived expertise of homelessness onto your board, it is going to be critically important to your success that you really focus on relationship building so that there is mutual trust and understanding, and that as a group you have shared commitments that everybody has bought into to increase the likelihood that you are successful. And so part of being in a transformational relationship is that the benefit is reciprocal. So there is not just benefit to you as the homelessness system of persons with lived expertise of homelessness being on your board, but they also are experiencing benefit. And benefit can look a lot of ways. I would suggest that it should always look like financial compensation, right? But that is only one benefit that people can receive. There can be coaching and mentoring. There can be opportunities for professional development that can lead to careers or, experience on resumes. There can be social interactions.
Now? Not now.
Lots of things can be beneficial to persons experiencing homelessness who participate in your system work. When you invite people to participate, you want very much to ensure that that participation is meaningful. So when, if you are doing shelter planning, right, about a new shelter program, and you bring together a focus group, and the questions that are asking the focus group is, what kind of bed should we have, and what color paint should we have, and what kind of meals do you like? Those are interesting things, but they're not really things that are using the expertise that people have and are bringing to the table, and they're not really meaningful, right? Like, they're not going to allow people to really participate in the meaningful planning of a program or a system. So I asked you to start by thinking about what engages you in your work, and those same things are what help make things meaningful for persons with lived expertise of homelessness that come into your spaces. So it's not a magic formula, and the best thing to do is to ask, just like I asked you, is to ask other people about what kinds of things that they want to work on, what kinds of things feel meaningful to them, right? So that you can move beyond this kind of input and advisory role to really deep engagement and shared decision making, so that the participation of persons with lived experience of homelessness really has the opportunity to make systemic changes within the work that you're doing. You want to recognize when tokenism is happening, and work to combat it. So making sure that people are not there only as a checkbox, that they really are given the opportunity and space to make significant system change and to provide their expertise in a way that makes sense. And each one of these slides we could dive way into and do work around. So hopefully we have that opportunity in the future. I want to just quickly introduce a concept about holding space for persons with lived expertise. Lots of communities start out with really excellent intentions of bringing persons with lived expertise into the space, and it kind of goes sideways. And the reason it goes sideways is because most of our meetings and processes are not really set up to effectively allow persons with lived expertise to participate in a meaningful way. But then when something goes sideways, almost always it is blamed on the person with lived expertise, rather than really looking at the fact that there was inadequate preparation and structures of support to make sure that people are successful. And so when you're doing a really excellent initiative, as you all are in your community, to make sure that a third of your participants are persons with lived expertise of homelessness, both on your board and the committee level, that's fabulous, but that requires a lot of infrastructure and preparation and support to make sure that it can be effective. And so some of the training that I recommend having really is for your existing system leaders to make sure that they are able to hold space effectively for persons with lived expertise of homelessness. And holding space really means working alongside someone without judgment, without making them feel inadequate, without trying to fix them or control the outcome, right? And it's really about engaging in true partnership and working together in a trauma-informed way. It will be important that as you come together in this new leadership group, that you are transparent and open with each other and with your larger membership group and your community. You will need to be honest about the fact that mistakes and missteps will happen, and speak about them and talk about them with difficult conversations when they do happen. They will happen. I can guarantee it. It almost always happens. As I mentioned, I conduct a workshop for HUD on engagement with persons with lived expertise. In that workshop with communities that very much want to be there and do that work, still every single time we end up at some point having a misstep that occurs that we need to talk about as a group, right? Because even though people have the best of intentions, there are a lot of white dominant culture norms that come into play. And some of the trauma-informed principles that we try and strive to carry out in our work don't always translate effectively to a planning and board and leadership type setting in the way that they should. And so you really want to be open and able to have the difficult conversations when mistakes and missteps occur, and make sure that people are not being harmed by participating and providing their expertise. You want to be honest about who has decision-making power, who has veto authority, right? What are the constraints and limitations about the work that can and can't be done within your system? And what are the forces that are at play? And so all of those things will allow you to begin to work to shift power, right? Because sharing power with persons with lived experience of homelessness is really the goal, rather than just inviting people for the sake of inviting people. And given the time, I'm gonna watch where I'm at, but in order to be able to shift power within your system, right, you want to think about where are the key leverage points where you can begin to involve shared decision making. Like bringing people into your board is a really important thing. But as a board, you are probably not doing a lot of the design work, right? That happens at committees or at a program level. So how can you think about the opportunity to co-create your system with persons with lived expertise of homelessness? And being sure that you have the opportunities for true shared decision making and planning. So when you think about what sharing power looks like, right, you want to think about who sets the agenda and facilitates the meetings, right? Setting the agenda and facilitation is a really powerful place to be. If I always get to define the agenda, then I always get to define the problem and I get to control how the solutions come into place. So you want to think about who sets the agenda, who facilitates the meetings, who defines what it is that you're working on, right? Who identifies the solutions to those problems, who's actually leading the work, and then who has the final say in decision making. And persons with lived expertise of homelessness need to be not only at the table, but actively sharing in all of those roles to be truly centered in your continuum. I don't have time for that one. I want to end with the idea of community agreements, and this really goes back to knowing that there will be difficult conversations that need to occur, that can be sometimes emotional and painful and uncomfortable, but really are the place of growth as you push yourself into a new space of equity. And so community agreements come in two types. Relational community agreements are about how we want to be in relationship with each other. And operational community agreements are really about the procedures and structures that everybody agrees to use as you work together in this space. I would suggest that there's a facilitated conversation in your future defining your community agreements as a board. And thinking about how do you determine what people need to effectively participate, and how do you create a safe space for everybody's participation and to have those difficult conversations, and that you're laying out your expectations. And I'll make sure to get that. Okay, so that was really quick and very high level, but I have a minute if anybody has any questions. I haven't been able to see the chat while I was talking, but if there's anything, I will stop sharing that.
No questions, Dusty. I want to just thank you, of course, for that presentation. And I do want to share with the board, there's a lot of information here that we need to provide to you. There's a resource binder that we'll be providing. There will be more intense training related to the nuts and bolts of what we do. But we felt as a board it important to start with ensuring that we're all on the same page in terms of how we'll be working together to strengthen our CLC. One thing I will say is while a third of individuals with lived experience are on our board, that will be the same for committees. So when Dusty mentioned how will you infuse the voice of those with lived experience in some of those other decisions, that will also be the case for our other committees, starting with even asking for volunteers for a nomination committee members later in our leadership board meeting today. So we have definitely adopted a model and a framework to how, in terms of how to make sure we are being inclusive throughout. Dusty, is there any way for you to give some high-level basic information about a continuum of care, an acronym that so many of us even still struggle to understand while we do the work? So if you are you able to walk us through some material, we will provide the slides, and as mentioned, provide continuous training to our board.
We'll see what we can get through. I will preface this by saying that I literally just did a continuum of care 101 training that was 2 parts that were 90 minutes each, right? And that was 101. So that was all basic information. And so in 15 minutes, we're going to get like 50 to 60,000 foot level. So we're going to skip all of this. So the continuum of care is a result of evolution of a long history of regulations that really have defined how the federal government expects communities to work and address homelessness. But the continuum of care interim rule, which is really what we still work under, and even though it was published in 2012 as part of the Hearth Act, it is still an interim rule. It has never been finalized, and that's been intentional because we make consistent changes to it. And once you finalize a rule at the federal level, it's next to impossible to go back and change it. So that's why, 11 years later, it's still interim. So both the COC interim rule and some of the things like the coordinated entry interim rule, I don't know that they'll ever be like totally finalized. They might be interim forever. So the goal of the continuum of care is really to provide a community-wide commitment to ending homelessness and promote planning and coordination across your system so that you can effectively utilize the federal funding that you receive to quickly rehouse individuals and respond to homelessness. There are really specific responsibilities that a continuum has as part of being the continuum of care. And as the leadership board of your continuum of care, ultimately the execution of every one of the COC's responsibilities falls to you. So it may be designated to staff, it may be designated to other agencies, it may be designated to committees, but really as the board, the buck stops here, and you are responsible as a group for making sure that the continuum of care is in compliance for all of HUD's responsibilities. So your continuum is geographically defined, right? So yours is Alameda County. Some are single cities, some are counties, some are whole states. It really just depends. And it is required to be made up of relevant organizations, both. And when I say continuum, I don't mean your board, I mean your larger membership that Chelsea talked about. And then your board is elected to carry out those responsibilities. But it's really a convening and planning body for your area, designed to execute all of those responsibilities. Then the COC establishes a board to act on its behalf. On its behalf is not defined by the HUD interim rule. You really have the opportunity to define how you execute most of the work in the COC on a community by community basis. But the board is the ultimate decision-making responsibility for your continuum of care. And how it works and how all of these essential activities are executed should be defined in your governance charter, which is your blueprint about how you're going to work as a COC. Your membership of your board has to be selected by a process that you define within your charter, and needs to be reviewed at least every 5 years. And you are required as a board to follow a code of conduct and have a conflict of interest policy and a recusal process, because you are making critical decisions about funding in your community. And so when there are conflicts of interest, if you you have space, for example, on your board for nonprofit providers, it is not appropriate for a nonprofit provider to vote on funding that could be received potentially or not by their agency, right? So you have to have appropriate conflict of interest and recusal processes. So your board is required to have at least one currently or formerly homeless individual on it. I will say that that was not historically defined. And around the country, we see many boards that their one person who meets that checkbox is somebody who experienced homelessness 20 years ago and now has been an executive director of an agency for the past 15 years, which is great experience to have on your board. But this past year in the NOFO, HUD really moved to change that by incentivizing and providing direction about the fact that their goal was that your person experiencing homelessness, that A, you have more than one. So you only got full points if you had more than one. B, you got more points if at least one of those individuals was unsheltered. And to count as persons with lived experience of homelessness for your board purposes, they had to have experienced homelessness within the past 7 years. Because the idea is that if people are providing information about your community systems, they should have experience that is relevant enough, because the homeless system now looks significantly different than it did 10, 15, 20 years ago. You have a code of conduct in place. I'm not going to go over that. I talked briefly about conflicts of interest. It'll be important to review your conflict of interest policy. Very quickly, I'll finish with this slide that kind of has a high level of lots of things on it, and that'll take me up the rest of the time for sure. But you have 4 buckets of responsibility as a COC board that you are responsible for, because these are required functions as part of your continuum of care. There is the management of your COC. So that is things like your governance charter, right? That needs to be reviewed annually by your board and voted on at least every 5 years by your entire membership. You have operations of your system. So that is, are you having regular membership meetings? Are you having board meetings? You know, is everything documented the way that it should be? You are required to monitor, assure that there is available and monitor the effectiveness of your coordinated access or coordinated entry system. You're required to have available and monitor the effectiveness of your written standards for your continuum. You're required to develop performance expectations and monitor your community's programs that receive continuum of care funding. And you're required to set the funding priorities for your community. You have a bucket that is systems planning, in which you're required to do an annual gaps in system analysis, right? You are to be able to ensure that your system is meeting the needs of persons experiencing homelessness, right? You use that systems and gaps analysis to identify your funding priorities and to develop connections to mainstream services, because the homeless system is not going to meet everyone's needs. And that you are looking at your system and aligning resources across funding sources. So that planning, for example, is usually designated to committees or staff members, other things that happen. So a lot of these things the board isn't doing themselves, but they are responsible to make sure that they are occurring and that they are getting regular updates. You are responsible for the data management. The board is required to designate an HMIS lead system administrator. You're responsible for selecting and evaluating the vendor that you use, because there are a number of different HMIS vendors that your system can be using. You're responsible for ensuring that there is timely submission of all of your federal data reporting, and that you are monitoring, and the HMIS lead is likely doing most of this, but that you are monitoring HMIS participation, compliance, privacy, security, and data quality, right? And that you're receiving regular updates on those things. And then you are responsible for the designation of the collaborative applicant, right? The collaborative applicant is the entity that submits the application to HUD on behalf of the continuum of care for your continuum of care funding and your program and planning grants, right? But the board is required to designate a collaborative applicant, and is ultimately responsible for facilitating the process to score, review, and rank projects and applications. Whether or not the board actually participates in any of that, that is usually done by staff and committees. But ultimately, as I said, all of these responsibilities and functions fall to the board to designate, to make sure that they are accomplished and to monitor that they are being done effectively. Each one of these has lots of different subsets of the ways it can be done and what falls into those buckets, but those are the major buckets that are required of a continuum of care, and the board has oversight and responsibility for. And so there's some resources about really understanding, and I know that we're working with Chelsea to put together some guidance for you in the form of a board manual to be able to have access and training, but there are lots of opportunities. As I mentioned, I just did, a 3-hour training on Continuum of Care 101 that would be useful, and recordings are available to be watched at any point, or we can come and do additional board training for you as necessary. So in 30 minutes or less, there is like high-level overview to what I feel strongly are really important topics that need more time and attention to you as a group. So I appreciate the commitment to ongoing training.
Mo, you're muted. Mo, you're muted.
All right, thank you, Dusty. And thank you, everybody here. We really don't have time because we're out of time right now, a lot of questions. However, we have created a buddy system for some of the new members. This will be available for people to look at it again if they want to remind themselves, because we recorded it. And I would also like to just say in conclusion that in Alameda County, even though we have the continuum of care, which our board is in charge of, there are things outside the boundaries of the federal granting system and definitions that we take care of too. So that is one thing that you will be hearing about as you go through in these subcommittees. Housing, prevention, those kinds of things are kind of out. Some of those step outside of the continuum of care. So thank all of you very much for attending this rapid fire session. It was good for me to listen to it, and I'm hopefully that those of you who have heard this probably only 1 or 2 times will kind of be reminded as we go throughout our meetings in the years to come of these very important duties and responsibilities. So I guess that's I mean, we're right at about time here.
Yes, we're at time. We gave a break here before the board meeting. I just want to indicate that it's a lot of information to digest, but there's a lot of resources and materials available, and EveryOne Home staff as well as the board members will be walking hand in hand as we continue to learn, or as there's continuation of learning through this process. So don't feel intimidated or overwhelmed. Just know that there's a commitment to ongoing learning that we will deploy. And Dusty, thank you again so much. And yes, you know that we've already committed to have you and some of your peers who also have been providing us with support, assist us with our ongoing training for our board. And so with that, let's give everyone a break, and we will see you